My dear beloved, there is something profound they have not admitted to a single soul yet, not to their closest friends, not to their family members, not even fully to themselves in their most private thoughts. But lately, every single emotional path they attempt to take somehow circles right back to you again. It is becoming completely impossible for them to escape this undeniable truth. Your energy has moved far beyond a simple memory and settled somewhere permanent inside their core emotional world. At first, they foolishly thought that passing time would calm everything down and make it fade. They sincerely believed that distance would eventually make those feelings quieter, much easier to ignore, and simple to organize into something neat and manageable, but the exact opposite happened instead. The more silence existed between you, the louder your presence became inside them. Now, they are beginning to understand why that happened. Real spiritual connection does not simply vanish because two people stop speaking openly for a while. Real connection waits patiently beneath the surface of daily life. It survives internal confusion. It survives intense fear. It survives all those painful moments where both hearts pretend not to care as deeply as they truly do. Lately, their heart has become thoroughly exhausted from pretending. Something deeply emotional is unfolding here that even they did not expect to happen. There was a recent moment where they suddenly stopped right in the middle of their ordinary daily routine because your memory arrived with unusual intensity. It was not a dramatic memory or a major milestone, but just something small and gentle, like the quiet sound of your laughter or the softness in your voice during a quiet, late-night conversation. It was the unique way your energy always carried a sense of pure calmness, even when complex emotions were difficult to explain out loud. That small, simple memory affected them far more deeply than it should have on a regular day. In that exact moment, something hidden inside them finally broke open emotionally. They realized with absolute clarity that they no longer want a future built around emotional avoidance. They no longer want shallow connections that only look good from the outside while feeling empty underneath. Because your presence showed them what true emotional sincerity actually feels like. Now, everything else in their world feels completely incomplete compared to that depth. They are beginning to understand that your love was never demanding, never manipulative, and never based on heavy pressure or expectations. It was patient, quiet, extraordinarily careful, and somehow that made it even more incredibly powerful to their soul. The surrounding world taught them to expect loud emotions, temporary excitement, and unpredictable affection. But your feelings carried something entirely different: true stability, emotional honesty, and deep peace. Peace affects a person profoundly when they have spent years surviving emotional chaos and building walls. Sometimes late at night, they replay those exact moments where they almost reached out to you but stopped themselves at the last second. They recall the moments where foolish pride interrupted honesty, and the moments where fear disguised itself as emotional control. Looking back now, those moments haunt them softly, because they realize how close they came to losing something truly meaningful, simply because they were terrified to fully feel it. Perhaps the most emotional part of this whole realization is that they can now see your hidden feelings clearly in memories they once completely misunderstood. They now see the slight pauses in your voice, the careful restraint in your choice of words, and the moments you pulled back emotionally just to protect your own fragile heart from disappointment. It all makes complete sense to them now. Instead of making them feel powerful or superior, that realization humbles them deeply, because they understand something important today. Loving quietly often requires far more courage than loving loudly. Anyone can express intense emotion during moments of complete certainty, but carrying genuine feelings silently while fearing misunderstanding takes incredible emotional strength. You did that for a long time, and they finally see it for what it was. They are no longer imagining a future without emotional vulnerability. In fact, vulnerability has started feeling strangely beautiful to them lately. Beautiful because your raw sincerity showed them that real human connection is not built through childish emotional games, but through honesty strong enough to survive fear itself. There are sudden moments where they imagine standing right in front of you again after all this emotional distance. They think deeply about what your eyes might reveal now that silence no longer hides the truth completely. They wonder whether the air between you will immediately feel different, softer, warmer, and much more emotionally open than ever before. Honestly, those quiet thoughts overwhelmed them because deep down inside, they already know this connection altered them permanently. It was not a temporary shift or a fleeting phase for one season. Your energy permanently changed the way they understand affection itself. Before meeting you, they thought love was mostly intense drama and excitement. Now they understand love can also feel entirely calm, grounded, and safe enough to breathe inside. That realization alone has already changed the exact way they move through their daily life. Even the people around them are starting to notice subtle differences in their behavior. They seem much more thoughtful lately, a bit more emotionally distracted, and far less interested in shallow, temporary attention from others. Once a person experiences real emotional depth, superficial connections become nearly impossible to tolerate for very long, and you became the rare emotional depth they simply cannot replace. This next truth matters deeply. They are starting to feel fiercely protective over the possibility of a future with you now. It is not a possessive feeling, but a protective stance over the connection itself, protective of your heart, and protective of the fragile honesty that has finally surfaced within them. That protective feeling surprised them because it arrived so naturally without any forced effort. Now they are realizing something that changes everything. They do not simply miss your physical presence in their life, but they miss who they became emotionally whenever they were around you, softer, more honest, and truly alive. That is precisely why distance no longer comforts them the way it once did. Distance now feels heavy, unnatural, and almost painful in ways they struggle to explain using simple logic. Somewhere tonight, while silence wraps around their thoughts once again, they are finally admitting something to themselves that they avoided for far too long. They are no longer trying to protect themselves from loving you. They are actively trying to figure out how to finally stop hiding it from you. The closer they move toward that truth emotionally, the faster their old lingering fears begin losing all power over them, because deep inside, they know something now that can never be undone. Your heart reached theirs long before actual words ever fully caught up, and ever since that profound realization settled inside them, nothing about their inner emotional world has felt the same again. There is a massive shift happening inside them now that even they can no longer deny or push away. The emotional distance they once depended on for personal safety is beginning to feel unbearable instead of comforting. The strange part is that this shift did not happen because someone forced them to confront their deepest feelings. It happened quietly and naturally, through realization after realization, slowly breaking down the massive walls they spent so long building around their heart. Lately, they have caught themselves doing small things they never used to do before, like reading old messages again, pausing when your name appears unexpectedly, and smiling at quiet memories they once tried so hard to suppress. Every single time it happens, the exact same question rises inside them with growing intensity. Why does everything still lead right back to you? That single question follows them everywhere they go now. It visits them during quiet mornings, during crowded moments surrounded by noisy people, and even during times when they try frantically distracting themselves with heavy work routines and responsibilities. Anything capable of silencing what they feel deep down. But absolutely nothing works the way it used to anymore, because your presence has already rooted itself far too deeply inside their emotional world. There was a very recent moment where they almost reached out to you, completely on impulse. It was not because they felt temporarily lonely or needed quick comfort, but because suddenly the very idea of remaining emotionally distant from you felt wrong to them. Completely and utterly wrong. They stared at their phone screen for much longer than usual, their thoughts spinning in endless circles. One part of them desperately wanted to speak honestly right then, while another part feared moving too quickly after everything that happened emotionally between you both in the past. Even though they managed to stop themselves that particular night, something extremely important still changed forever. For the very first time, they realized that their silence is no longer protecting their heart, it is actively hurting them. That heavy realization is becoming completely impossible for them to ignore any longer. Now they are beginning to understand that your unique connection was never based on simple convenience. Convenience disappears easily when things get difficult, but what exists between you two successfully survived confusion, intense fear, vast emotional distance, and long periods of unfinished conversations. That specific kind of bond leaves permanent marks directly on the human soul, and they can finally see that clearly now. There are frequent moments lately where they suddenly become deeply emotional over the absolute smallest reminders of your existence, a random song playing, a familiar phrase, or a certain quiet time of night. Even the surrounding silence sometimes feels completely filled with your unique energy. What unsettles them most of all is just how natural it feels. Your presence no longer feels separate from their emotional reality, it feels woven into it completely and permanently. Honestly, they are so tired of pretending otherwise. Sometimes they sit alone in the dark, imagining how vastly different everything could have been if complete honesty had arrived much sooner between you both, wondering just how many painful misunderstandings grew simply because both of your hearts were trying far too hard to protect themselves from potential hurt. Themselves from vulnerability. That thought creates a quiet sadness inside them because deep down they know this connection deserved openness long before now. But there is another truth slowly becoming clear to them as well. Perhaps everything unfolded this way because both of you needed time to emotionally grow into the connection. Instead of rushing into it before you were completely ready, that realization softened something deep inside them recently. Instead of feeling regret alone, they started feeling genuine gratitude too. They feel gratitude that despite all the confusion, despite all the emotional delays, the connection somehow remained alive underneath everything, and that changes the way they see your future together. Now their feelings no longer feel abstract or distant. They feel real enough to build a future around, real enough to change plans for, and real enough to fight fear for. Fear is exactly what they are confronting right now. Not the fear of loving you, but the fear of losing the opportunity to finally love you honestly. That fear wakes them up at night sometimes, because now they understand something deeply painful. Genuine emotional connection is rare, extremely rare. Most people spend years surrounded by temporary attention while secretly longing for one person capable of understanding them deeply. You became that person for them, and that realization carries enormous emotional weight. Now there are moments where they suddenly imagine seeing you again after all this emotional growth finally settles between you both. They imagine conversations without guardedness, eye contact without hidden feelings underneath, and what it would feel like to finally stop carrying emotional restraint. Every time your connection becomes intense, and every time they imagine those moments, their heart moves closer to courage. Courage is growing inside them now, little by little, the courage to stop pretending your connection can remain unfinished forever, the courage to stop acting emotionally unaffected, and the courage to admit that your presence changed them far more deeply than they originally intended. Perhaps the most beautiful part of all this is the way they think about you now. It is no longer only about attraction or emotional intensity. It has become something softer, more meaningful, and far more permanent. They think about peace when they think about you, emotional safety, quiet happiness, and the kind of love that feels calm enough to build a real life inside. That is what overwhelms them lately. It is not a fantasy but a reality. The possibility that someone like you could genuinely exist in their future emotionally, not temporarily but permanently. The more they allow themselves to feel that possibility fully, the less interested they become in running from this connection anymore. Listen carefully, because this next truth matters deeply. They are starting to realize that your love did not weaken them emotionally the way they once feared. It strengthened them. It made them more honest with themselves, more emotionally aware, and more willing to confront parts of their heart they ignored for years. That transformation is still happening quietly inside them right now. Even if you cannot fully see it yet, and even if they have not spoken every truth aloud yet, their emotional world is already reorganizing itself around the reality of you. Somewhere tonight, while your name drifts through their thoughts once again, they are finally understanding something undeniable. Some people enter life briefly and disappear like passing seasons, but others arrive carrying a feeling so rare that once the heart recognizes it, nothing afterward ever feels the same again. There is a quiet battle happening inside them now, and nobody around them fully understands it. On the outside, they still try to appear composed. They continue conversations, move through responsibilities, and smile when expected to smile. Inwardly, everything feels different now, because your connection no longer feels like something they can place in the background of their life. It has moved directly to the center, and that realization is changing them faster than they expected. Lately, they have been feeling emotional waves at strange moments during the day. Moments where memories of you suddenly arrive so strongly that they have to stop whatever they are doing just to breathe through it. It is not because the feeling is painful, but because it is real, far too real to dismiss anymore. There was a recent night where sleep would not come easily to them. They kept turning over thoughts in their mind, replaying your energy, your voice, and your presence. Somewhere between silence and exhaustion, they admitted something to themselves they had avoided for a very long time. They do not want another temporary connection. They do not want shallow conversations that disappear by morning. They do not want affection without emotional depth anymore. What they want is you, not a fantasy version of you, but the real you. The one who stayed emotionally sincere even while protecting your heart quietly. The one who carried genuine affection without forcing it onto them. And the one whose presence felt calming instead of confusing. Honestly, that realization shook them deeply, because now they understand why nobody else fully reached them emotionally the way you did. They are beginning to notice how different life feels whenever your energy enters their thoughts. Their mood changes instantly, their heart softens instantly, and even difficult days feel lighter for a moment when they think about the possibility of finally being emotionally honest with you. That kind of emotional impact cannot be ignored forever. The more they try understanding it logically, the more emotional it becomes instead. Sometimes they wonder whether you realize how deeply you affected their spirit without even trying. You did not demand emotional control over them, nor did you pressure them into attachment. In fact, your restraint made everything more powerful, because it allowed them to discover their feelings naturally instead of feeling emotionally cornered. That changed everything for them, because genuine connection feels entirely different from emotional pressure, and your connection always felt genuine. There are moments lately where they imagine your future together so vividly that it almost feels like a memory instead of imagination. Small moments, quiet moments, sitting together after long days, sharing silence without awkwardness, and looking at each other without fear, interrupting the emotional honesty between you both. Those thoughts stay with them now. Perhaps what affects them most deeply is how peaceful those visions feel. Not chaotic, not dramatic, but peaceful. It is the kind of peace they secretly spent years searching for in the wrong places. They are no longer emotionally satisfied by distraction. Things that once entertained them temporarily now feel empty very quickly, because once someone experiences emotional depth, superficial attention loses its power, and your connection gave them emotional depth in a way they never expected. Sometimes they feel regret over how long fear controlled their choices. They think about the emotional distance that could have been shortened if honesty had arrived sooner. But strangely, even that regret is turning into clarity now, because every moment apart forced them to understand the true value of what they almost lost. You. Now that they fully see it, they cannot unsee it anymore. There is also something else happening inside them lately that they have not spoken about openly. They are beginning to feel emotionally protective over your future together. They think carefully before making certain choices now, questioning whether certain paths still align with the emotional truth growing inside them. Because your connection no longer feels separate from their future, it feels connected to it completely. That realization carries enormous emotional weight, and they are slowly preparing themselves emotionally for honesty. Real honesty, the kind that changes relationships permanently once spoken aloud.